Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, Richard Waring. How are you, Richard?
Very good.
Good to hear. I'm going to read a brief introduction of Richard Waring. He actually has a new poetry collection out, and it's called, excuse me. He has a new poetry collection out, and it's called, excuse me for one moment. There's a new, sorry for the technical. He has a new poetry collection out, What Love Tells Me, okay? And his poems have appeared in the Comstock Review, Chess, Sanctuary, Contact 2, Dark Horse, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and other publications. He's been anthologized in the Pocket Poetry Parenting Guide, Rough Places, Plain, Poems of the Mountains, and the Unitarian and Universalist Poets. He went to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poets, right? Studied with
Naropa Institute.
Yeah, and he studied with Allen Ginsberg. He edited Zonë, a feminist journal for women and men. He's the writing workshop leader. He was at the Star Island Conference on the Art, and that's out of the coast of New Hampshire, right?
Off of Portsmouth.
Yeah, his chapbook, Listening to Stones, was published by Pudding House, and he runs a workshop for publishing poets in Newton, Massachusetts. So I was going to ask you first, Richard, you studied, I'm very interested, you studied at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poets under Ginsberg.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what that experience was like.
It was pretty phenomenal. Ginsberg was amazing. Mm-hmm. Speaking extemporaneously without notes. We mostly studied William Carlos Williams, who we knew very well, and he could actually say where Williams was in his career, whether he'd had a stroke, just very insightful things that really opened our eyes to his poetry. And this is the kind of poetry that Ginsberg favored, mm-hmm. Being poetry of the street, of conversation, no footnotes, very unlike T.S. Eliot.
No ideas, but in things, right?
Right. So that kind of put me on that kind of a trajectory of, mm-hmm. of being in the American grain and no footnotes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's clear and straight, no chaser type of stuff.
Yeah, you didn't have to have, versatility with several languages and know all sorts of complex references. Mm-hmm. It was something that was accessible and within the human realm.
Okay. And but tell me about Ginsberg, the teacher,
he would start every class by sort of a roll call, but he would start with half of a sentence, and as he called your name, you would fill in the other half. And he would do a mini critique of your second half.
He would call your name, and he would give a sentence instead.
Yeah.
He'd call your name and then give a sentence?
Right. Like, marijuana makes me, and then you'd have to fill in the blank.
Okay. And
then he would say, well, that's too much in your head, it's got to be out, you have to see it. It has to be, your senses have to be able to grab a hold of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the class would go. It was a 6-week program during the summer, but unlike the rest of the year, there were a lot of poets that were available and would come through town and give workshops. People like W.S. Merwin, John Ashbery. So it was pretty extraordinary. And it was at the very beginning of Naropa Institute, so it wasn't even accredited yet.
So you didn't get like an MFA or anything from it?
No, it was just kind of a nice add-on
to
my more traditional.
I think they offer an MFA now, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So it was basically.
So when was this?
This was in 1975.
Okay.
So it was a place where Buddhists were encouraged to learn more about the arts, and where poets were encouraged to meditate. And there was a lot of interaction in that way.
Okay. You study with anyone else there?
Well, I took a workshop with W.S. Merwin, John Ashbery, Ann Waldman, Ron Padgett, a number of other people.
Yeah. Any anecdotes to share?
Well, Ashbery started out saying, no more grandfather poems. And he handed out a sheet of hieroglyphics, and we were supposed to translate. So it led to some very interesting, totally off the mark translations.
Okay. Interesting. So, you're also a designer. We were just talking briefly for the New England Journal of Medicine. You do the layout and things like that. Does that influence your work at all?
It comes out every week.
Yeah.
About 100 pages of editorial matter. And medicine produces a lot of new words.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that way. And
you have a lot of words from the medical world in your poems.
Yeah. It's been a shaping force in some of my poems, and fortunately the medical community has begun to welcome poems. I had one in the American Journal of Nursing. They have a the art of nursing page. They actually pay $150. Not that I could leave my day job anytime, ever.
Right.
But it's nice that medicine is becoming less clinical in that regard, and seeing the importance of the human element and the emotional life of patients.
Okay. And of course, the one you studied, William Carlos Williams, was a doctor, right?
Right.
Right. I remember reading a story he wrote about working in this women's hospital in New York City. I don't know if you've ever read that. It was a short story. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, when he first started out. Yeah. Anyway, reading about your kids, they seem to give you a portal to your spiritual. I don't have kids, so I mean, this is probably common knowledge among parents, but this is to give you a portal to your spirituality. I mean, can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I was really inspired by Sharon Olds and Galway Kinnell. Children used to be sort of off limits, or
seen not but heard, not
yeah.
heard.
And I've found, being a parent, that it's much more of a two-way interaction than I ever realized when I was a child under my parents' care. And it becomes kind of a double eyesight, double vision, because you can see, like for instance, my son, since he was my only son, and I have an older daughter, I in part became brother to him. We'd go in the woods. There'd be a stream, and he couldn't jump across, so I'd throw him across, and then I'd jump over, and it was quite magical and inspirational.
Do you think you wouldn't have such a portal if you didn't have kids?
Well, this book goes into the dissolution or the change of my status from married to single, and then when I became married again, I wanted it to be with someone who also had children.
And you did, yeah. So you married someone with children.
Yeah.
So the children are players.
There is something about having children that does something to your ego. You become, in part, selfless. It's kind of a project in selflessness during a great stretch of time.
A good parent, you're selfless.
Yeah.
If you're a good one.
And it's like a pretty big project. I'd never had such a project before as when I took on parenthood. And then you take it on again, so it's not just an accident. It's something you actually want. And it was interesting to have a son and a daughter to experience what that was like. So I'm the middle of 3 brothers.
Did you come from a particularly literary family, or no? Yes.
It was kind of skip generational. My mother's father was Harvard educated, mechanical engineer at Bell Lab, and always encouraged me to think about writing, because he said there were a lot of people at Bell Lab that they tinker and they don't know how to explain what they're doing. So somebody that could go in and be sort of a handmaiden to those inventive minds.
Almost a translator.
And it kind of dawned on me that I was actually taking up that mantle that he suggested to me. And his wife was someone that he met after the First World War when he was in France, and the French university opened their doors to American soldiers before they could come home.
Mm-hmm.
And so his French tutor is the one who he really enjoyed the lessons, and she eventually became his wife, and she wrote poetry and painted. So that gave me a little portal into the creative life.
Okay. Now, you know, the poems often are, the poems often have you and nature as intimate bedfellows. And I know you're a bit of a naturalist yourself, is that true?
Yeah, I admire
I remember
Thoreau
I was doing a
and
reading
Emerson.
in Belmont at the nature preserve. Remember
Right.
you were there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
The naturalist, the observations I find fascinating. Charles Darwin would be another mentor, a hero of mine, who once saw a flower that had a huge bell and no spot for an insect or anything to land on. So he speculated that there was a hovering creature with a long bill that pollinated the plant, that it had to have some sort of reason for developing that way. And sure enough, he never saw it, but later people found a hummingbird that fit the bill,
Mm-hmm.
and so they called it the Darwin hummingbird.
Okay.
So that kind of insight really intrigues me.
Okay.
And my mother was a biologist, worked at Sloan Kettering doing cancer research, and taught me the names of plants. My dad had been an outdoorsman, working for the Appalachian Mountain Crew, developing the trails, the initial trails. And so between the two of them, I developed a comfort being in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you know, I was reading one of your first poems. It might have been the first one, and I read. I particularly like the marriage was falling apart. You had a lot of, you had a great line about sleeping and dreaming of spiders, I believe it was, and
Yeah.
tarantulas in
Mm-hmm.
the what was it again? Tarantulas in
The cargo ship.
the cargo ship. The words
Yeah.
came out like a tarantulas in a cargo ship. So it was really, you know, using those things to really define a marriage that is going south, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also liked where you were talking about hands that are looking for that have blind hunger to them,
Mm.
you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, this is after the birth of your child, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, the poet's that way. It has this hunger for meaning, for, you know, it's searching for something. Poem never ends. The poem is always incomplete, really, right? It keeps needing, it keeps evolving or whatever, and you're looking for something for the. I mean, could that be a metaphor for being a poet? You think?
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Expand on that.
Well, I should say that the title, What Love Tells Me, initially I was going to call it What Love Tells,
Mm-hmm.
but that sounded a bit pompous.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Eric Hyatt said,
I don't think
what
I've
love
interviewed
tells
him.
me.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference, because then it becomes a personal
Mm-hmm.
thing that could be universalized. But then I Googled to see where did anyone else take this great title, and it turned out that Gustav Mahler had some phrases that he used for some of the movements in his Third Symphony, and it was, "What the flowers tell me, what the animals tell me, what the angels tell me, what love tells me." And I was very happy that love was the ultimate phrase, and really pleased with all the earlier phrases as well. And to me, love is such a powerful, multivalent way of embracing everything. I'm finding that the poems that I write now are poems that I write out of an abiding love that I've had for many years. Like, for instance...
So evidently I misinterpreted those hands.
No, not really.
Oh, yeah.
But, moss, for instance, I've loved it for so many years. And
What's that?
Moss.
Oh, moths.
And I just recently wrote a poem devoted to moss. And you wouldn't know it, but there's something like 16,000 varieties of moss.
And I hate them all.
And people get on their hands and knees to see what they look like and call them things like long swan, feather moss, and it's just amazing, the nomenclature around
Moths.
this very tiny thing that is the kind of arbiter between water and land. It's kind of the first thing that develops the land we stand on.
So listen, I want you. You got you got some time to read, about 14 minutes. So you can read a lot from your book. Now, again, the book is What Let Tells Me. When did it come out?
This came out in September of last year, 2016.
Okay, and it's by who? What press?
Word Poetry is out of Cincinnati.
Okay.
And
so one would go to their website best, rather than Amazon, get the book, right? Or
you could go there, and it would actually link to Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you have a website yourself, don't you?
I don't.
Oh, I thought you did.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. You should have one.
I'm working on that.
Yeah, okay. So let us begin with your public
poetry. I'll start, speaking of children. This poem, which originally appeared in Sanctuary, Mass Audubon magazine.
Okay.
And then there was a contest for poems to appear in Edmonds Park in Newton. There are 14 locations that were sandblasted, and then letraset press-on letters, white letters, were placed on these pillars, and then it was shellacked. And the project manager was Gray Held, and Wendy Drexler
Was this for the
assisted.
was this for the Arts Festival? No,
this was earlier than that, and Wendy Mnuchin judged something like 100 poems, and 14 were put in there. And so, in a sense, you're walking in the woods and encountering a poetry anthology.
Oh, wow.
So this is called In Tall Grass. Over and over the grasses part, for winds that will never give up, swelling, cresting, receding back on themselves, wrapping around us. We are glittering like the metallic green of a tiger beetle, unhinged for flight, alive in a field where so much awaits, the mossy sorrows, the grass-hopping surprises. We fall in love with all that is not ours, this particular firefly, that determined stalk of yarrow. Leaving the woods is a sadness, returning home a vague diminishment, that we are father and son, and not some wild things in the night.
Nice.
My son is a professional oboist, and I've got a few poems about...
Who does he play with?
He's finishing a master's program and wants to be part of a symphony orchestra. And we're going to be doing some collaborative performances
Great.
of him playing oboe and my
Great. We're going to do a CD.
reading.
A CD or something.
Oh, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
So this is called Watching My Son Make a Reed. You take the cane that comes all the way from southern France, hollow it on your gouging machine, place it on the shaper tip, and run a razor down. You carve your heart out along its windows, rub the back to thinnest vanishing, reveal your eliding spine, coax tones that are like nothing in this world. I never taught you to shave, yet you hone your life on a stone, shape with ease, applying beeswax to your thread, counting the wraparounds and tying off. You toil in silence for something beyond sunlight, moisture, tongue, breath, fingers moving to improve what nature gave you, wrestling perfection into a note's first song. Every sorrow leads to this, a longing happy enough to climb a scale. This is how you know what will be your cry. The crow trembles, the reed slides gently into place. And
A poem should have its own music as well, and so is it going to be interesting to collaborate with your son? Will
he's going to be playing classical pieces.
Okay.
Bach and
but how are you going to determine
Cézanne.
what pieces are best for the poem?
It'll be a kind of a back and forth.
Mhm.
But since you mentioned it, there is a young composer who's 13 years old, I believe, in middle school, who is taking some of my poems and turning them into
Wow.
songs.
What is he, prodigy or something?
And you know, the Greek
Uh-huh.
lyric
Uh-huh.
comes from lyra,
Mm-hmm.
which is musical instrument.
Yeah.
And so the Greeks felt that lyrics were a kind of poem to be sung. And so this is one of the poems that he's going to debut
Wow.
next month. It's called Night. Breath is something I share with the bruised grays of evening. I watch as light calls itself home, descending a flight of stairs and leaving the shadows to play among themselves. Slowly, as I listen, sky is a new liquidity. Drink me, I am the keeper of lost knucklebones. I will make sorrow seem sweet. Not to be outdone, the moon shows up, goes traipsing until it meets the distant city, plunges beneath the kindred kindling of neon, and I speak at last with Orion and his dogs. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah. What school does he go to?
He goes to the Chenery Middle School in Belmont.
Okay.
And we mentioned medical poems, and 20 years ago, I gave my older brother one of my kidneys.
Yeah, I read that poem.
He was dealing with diabetes.
How's he doing
He was
now?
on renal. Unfortunately, we lost him
Oh, I'm
in
sorry.
January.
Oh.
But he'd gone 20 years with my kidney,
Mm-hmm.
which was about the limit. And his 4 boys, the youngest was 8 when the transplant happened. And now all 4 boys are married, and he had 6 grandchildren. So
He had a full life.
it really, gave him a second shot at life.
Mhm.
I give my brother a kidney. After our well-wishers leave the hospital, he comes to my room in his face mask, full of gratitude, my big brother, and we talk as we haven't among the tubes of our bedside existence. They left us once, our parents, and he put on the classical record from the red box set. We danced around the turntable in our footed sleepers, making the room dizzy, and left this world to spin through carpetless space, bits of destiny, joy into joy, like the vision I had under my eyelids, waking out of surgery to the two lights merging, our arms holding everything there is. It was a kind of vision that I had, that these two kidney-shaped lights just kind of merged together.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. And then
When did you have this vision? It was
under my eyelids.
Yeah.
And then I closed my eyes again to see if it was still there, and it had vanished.
And when did this happen?
Shortly after the surgery
Yeah.
had taken place.
Yeah. Wow.
But it gave me the sense that it's like a part of God giving to a part of God. I don't just...
Yeah. We all have those experiences, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
where we pay attention.
That somehow, well, the borders of my body were obliterated temporarily, and part of me went into my brother, and it was sort of like a birthing experience, the way women will talk about having a child, you know? Only in my case, I was just reviving my brother, who at that point was so weak he couldn't even walk the dog.
Wow.
And probably would have languished on some transplant list.
Yeah.
If I hadn't stepped forward, you know?
Wow. Must have been hard for you, too. A little frightening.
It was 8 days of nausea and then 4 weeks.
No, I meant to make that decision. Was it just a no-brainer? You were going to do it?
Well, logic took hold. I said, well, actually, they say that sibling donations are the best. Oh my God, I'm a sibling.
Yeah.
And I stepped forward, and at any point I could have said, I can't do this, but I stayed with it, and
Good.
For me it was just a 4-week interlude, and the real hero was my brother dealing with the diabetes, which was still there, and going, 40 years out of his 63 years with this totally intractable disease that shortens your life.
Yeah. I think you have time for one more. You got a few minutes. Actually, thank you. Richard, we're out of time, but thank you for being here on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer.
Fantastic.